All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the May 17th Public Works Infrastructure Committee meeting. Appreciate everybody being here. Call this meeting to order, and let's just start with an introduction of committee members. My name's Neil Dobler, District 7.
Tony Emerson, District 4.
Mike Lesser, District 9.
Great, thank you. And I think we don't generally do this every meeting, but I think if we could just have an introduction of the folks at the table here, that would be great, starting with the Chief of Staff.
Bill Cochran, Chief of Staff and City Manager.
Hannah Yulrig, Deputy Director of Public Works.
James Jackson, Director of Public Works.
Todd Workman, Supervisor, Topeka Street Department.
Tony Char, Interim Deputy Director, Street Department.
Great. Thank you. Let's move to item 2, which is approval of the April 29th meeting minutes. If there are no corrections, I would entertain a motion.
I move approval.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and approved. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes. Moving on to item 3, 2021 project update.
Okay, Mr. Chair, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How about you, sir?
Outstanding, sir. Okay, to start off with, next slide, please. We've got Southwest 10th Street from Wanamaker to Fairlawn. They placed the aggregate on the street between west and southwest Woodbridge and Chatham last week. Prior to doing that, they had to put some geofabric down to add to the sump subgrade locations, and we're experiencing some weather delays, but the completion date is still expected to be November 19th, 2021.
Great.
Next slide, please. Southwest 12th, Kansas to Washburn. Underground utility work under construction, 12th and Southwest Washburn intersection. The lane was closed through traffic at 12th the week of May 10th for reconstruction of 12th between Lane and Lincoln. Utilities were installed and the road surface construction between Kansas and Topeka Boulevard. Completion date for Kansas to Washburn segment, November 23rd, 2021. North Kansas Avenue, the water line has been completed. North Kansas and Norris intersection are closed for stormwater system connections. The north half of the street construction will follow once the south side is completed. And we expect that to be completed by mid-August. North Kansas Morse to Soldier. The road subgrade prep is currently underway with the west side of North Kansas and the Morse intersection. The waterline work continues going northward, and their two-way traffic is still being maintained while the area is under construction on the southbound side. And the anticipated completion date is December 2nd. Next project is Southeast Deer Creek. The full depth patching in the northbound lanes, and there's been additional patching, I'm understanding, after we actually rotomilled. We found some depression in some areas where we needed to do some additional full depth patching on that side. Once we get done with this, the southbound lanes will follow, and until that time, two-way traffic is being maintained on the southbound side. An anticipated completion date of July 16th. Central Park neighborhood, the SORT projects. Construction is still underway for over 37,000 square feet of sidewalk. 2 out of the 5 alleys are currently under construction. The alley work in some areas includes sectional replacement of sewer mains, and the work is in the general area of Southwest Polk on the east boundary, Central Park Avenue on the west boundary, Huntoon Street on the north, and 16th Street on the south. And the second area is Southwest Polk on the eastbound boundary, Southwest Buchanan Street on the westbound boundary, Southwest 16th Street on the north boundary, and Southwest 17th Street on the southern boundary. And the completion date for that is anticipated to be October 29th. Next project is Lane Street from 15th to 16th. This is an emergency repair. The emergency work ordered following asphalt road surface failure. The sand fill was discovered and replaced with flowable fill above the utility infrastructure. The completion is expected by early to mid-June. Next project, Southwest Urist, 21st to 29th. This is an accelerated repair. It was approved as part of the 2021 Mill and Overlay Project, an add-on being designed in-house. It's currently in the office check phase. The final plans are due by the 1st to mid-June, and the project will have an aggressive construction schedule to facilitate completion by the start of the school year.
Wow.
Sure that makes you happy, sir.
It does. It makes a lot of people happy. Thank you.
Southwest 8th Street Sidewalk Project. The sidewalk project construction is complete. So what are we in? Punch? We're in the final phase now?
We're complete, period.
Oh, we're complete.
Just want to show that we're complete. That's the final of the 2020 infill.
Outstanding. Thank you, sir. Okay, and Topeka Boulevard, 45th to 49th. That mill and overlay project with full depth patching is complete as well, and it is currently open to traffic. Next slide are projects under design. I'll give you a moment to read over those, sir, and if you have any questions.
Any questions from the committee?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mr. Jackson, thanks for the report.
You're welcome, sir.
I did have a question on the Southeast Deer Creek trafficway. You said you did some full-depth patching
Yes.
on that.
Yes, sir.
And it looks, I can't tell from the picture, but do you use concrete in those or is it asphalt?
If it's a concrete base, we use concrete,
It was a
correct?
concrete base.
Okay.
Okay, so that's what you do then?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Okay. Okay, next slide, please, ma'am.
All right, any questions on this list?
That's it. Okay.
Great presentation.
Okay, you're welcome, sir.
All right, I know we have a couple of council members online, Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala and Councilman Duncan. Any questions from either of you at this point? Councilman Duncan, the Urish project, is that a thumbs up?
On yours, yes. Yeah.
All right.
Don't slow it down. Keep it moving.
Okay, let's move on to item 4, fleet program update. Anna?
So today we're actually going to listen to finances and legal's perspective regarding the fleet program as Enterprise has it stated. Jessica and I have worked on some of the financial analysis that she'll provide her opinion on, as well as Mary has taken the time to go over the enterprise agreement completely and has worked through different issues and can speak to any challenges that she foresees or any of the pieces that she has concern. But both are definitely on track. So coming out of this committee meeting, really looking to this body to help us move forward, whether it is moving forward with the enterprise lease program and taking it to the full governing body and council, or if this is not a direction that the city feels is advantageous at this time. And that way we can have a direction and start to act on it either way. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jessica or Mary, whichever one I guess wants to go first.
Mary, I'll go first if that's all right.
Okay, sure.
Thanks. I believe the request is that that finance provide some feedback on the financial viability of this option. And so just to begin, I think that the underlying policy question is really drives, I guess, the answer from finance. So my understanding, based on communication with Public Works, is that the city's current fleet is old. It is out of service quite a bit. It requires a significant maintenance. So that's the issue that we're trying to address. And so obviously there's several ways that we can address that. All of them require some sort of funding. One of those would be to provide adequate operating funds to support the current program, which is putting money into the reserve fund for fleet and then working through the replacement cycle. Another option that this group has discussed quite a bit in the last year is the leasing option. So it's obviously many communities, or some communities do this. So it's an option that we should consider. So I think from the finances perspective, leasing is unlikely to be the most financially efficient method to acquire vehicles in the long run. Now, that doesn't mean that the option is a poor option to help address what the fleet department has identified as a significant concern. So taking a step back, if the goal is to address the aged fleet as quickly as possible without the most significant financial impact in the near term, then leasing is a viable option. However, if the governing body would choose not to go forward with leasing, what will need to happen is an evaluation of the fleet. Is the fleet too big? Do we need to reduce vehicles? And if we think that the current fleet is actually the appropriate size, but we don't want to move forward with leasing, we need to start putting additional money aside out of operations in both the reserve fund, but then also to implement immediately. So taking a step back again and looking at leasing as a viable option, and you've seen many models from both Enterprise and then also from Hannah's team. The reason that we see such at this point, a strong option from leasing is because of the lower interest rate environment that we find ourselves in globally. That kind of drives our annual costs related to our the lease. And then we also have a really strong used car market. So the stronger the used car market, the greater return the city will receive when Enterprise actually does sell those used vehicles. So right now, it is a strong market for us to enter into this type of arrangement. As we all know, interest rates can change fairly quickly. And they can change even over time in a way that the city wouldn't be able to get out of the lease arrangement without having to work out over time. And then the strong used car market is fairly new. We've kind of flipped in the last year. So there's obviously a possibility that we could flip back. And so if both of those start to go out of line with what we're seeing right now, even the current agreement would be less advantageous for the city. So I think in summary, it's really what the governing body wants to do with our current fleet and how to address an aged fleet, a fleet that is out of service more often than others, or more often than if we had a more up-to-date fleet. And then also just the overall maintenance requirements. One of the positive things I do see out of a leasing arrangement is that it would likely give us access to more fuel efficient vehicles, traditional fuel, and then also alternative fuel more quickly. And so you could tailor a leasing arrangement to try to target specific types of fuel to try to get to some of the city's goals when it comes to sustainability. So you don't have to necessarily do every vehicle. You could try to do a more tailored program. But in summary, it is a viable option if the governing body does not want to put significant near-term resources to replacing the fleet. But if the governing body chooses to go forward with leasing, please remember that when the city does need to unwind this arrangement, there is a significant financial burden. So either we pay now or we pay later, but either way, it is a viable option. It just depends on which of the policy goals we want to address immediately. So I think that that's all my prepared remarks, but I'm happy to answer other questions.
Is there questions from the committee?
Yes,
Councilman
Chair.
Emerson.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I don't know if things have changed since our last meeting or not, or since the meeting a couple meetings ago, I guess, when we initially spoke about this, but I thought the things that Hannah had, the analysis she'd done is in the short term, and this is just specific to pickups, I think half-ton and three-quarter-ton pickups, we could actually lease those brand new ones for a year and actually get more money than we paid for them in returning. Did something change, or?
That's driven, it's just, her model is driven by the lower interest rates and the strong used vehicle market. So her model still stands, but both of those could switch or change.
Right, but if we're only looking at in the next year, interest rates, I mean, if they go up, and they might, but say they go up 1%, it's probably about the most they could possibly go up in a year, given all the politics behind interest rate. So I guess I still don't understand how an interest rate going up, because if you had a lower cost lease, you know, if you buy a bond now that has take out a loan that has a lower interest rate, it's better for you when interest rates go up that you locked in that lower rate. So I guess I don't understand how interest rates going up would impact getting out of a lease early. You think they would want to get you out to get the lease, to get the rate up?
So with Enterprise's model, it's locked in for 1 year. So assuming that the market holds steady for this year, into the next cycle, when we go to renew our lease or trade in the vehicles at that time, we would still have that benefit. The long-term viability, which is what Jessica was referring to, is less stable and is likely to reverse in terms of the advantageous nature it is to the city today, with interest rates likely going back up at some point. And with that, typically the used car market also goes down in strength, because people tend to do more credit incentives with new vehicles, and that tends to flip based on that supply and demand factor. Based on the current model, it still is advantageous for the city to do it for 1 year, but we would have to be prepared at that point, to Jessica's point, to unwind the program, which is approximately a $2 million investment at that point, because we still need the vehicles to maintain operations. So we'd essentially have to let Enterprise sell them on our behalf, take that equity that we've gained in it and put that towards the purchase of new ones, but still net out approximately $2 million at that time. Or we continue with the program another year, or however long we determine at that point, and reinvest that equity back into the program to keep our operational costs lower than they otherwise would be, and continue to expand it out.
And if I may follow.
You bet.
Thank you. I guess just to be clear, you're not saying we have to pay them $2 million to get out of the lease. You're saying to replace the vehicles, if we have, I don't know, 50 trucks of $40,000, it'd be $2 million, I guess. And you're saying if we needed to go out and buy vehicles, we'd have a $2 million investment at that time.
Correct.
But in the meantime, if we actually make money over the next year, why do we care what it costs, you know, a year from now to buy vehicles? If in the short term, for next year, we can actually make money on this, in my mind, it's a pretty easy decision, but.
And I can let Jessica speak to the financial piece a little bit more, but I think at that point it becomes the cash that's available to the city to spend the $2 million to purchase the vehicles, because at that point we would still need them to operate. So are we willing to make a little bit of money, so we'd save essentially on the cost of those vehicles over the course of the year. But today we're not financially set up to where we would purchase that many light vehicles today. We just don't have the operating budget to do so. So it would be a future investment that would be in excess of what our annual budget allows for, based on the current allocations that we have in place.
Okay.
Chair?
Yes, sir.
I think one of the things that we're also looking for is, in a fleet program with a lease program, do we want to go all in? Do we want to do lease part vehicles or not lease vehicles? And by that, I mean, the state of Kansas went through a thing a couple of years ago where they got rid of all their vehicles and they went to a fleet arrangement. And they found that to be an epic failure, because at some point you do have to own your own vehicles for certain things. And so they do lease certain vehicles now, but they don't lease all their vehicles. And so I think that's one of the things we're looking for guidance on, how the city council would like to move forward, leasing has its as you know, it has its upsides. But I don't know if it's one of those things that we want to jump in and lease every single vehicle that we utilize. And like Hannah pointed out, and I think you pointed out too, Councilman Emerson, is that we make money next year, but 2 or 3 years from now, that money may not be like that because used vehicles, the market, and all that. So, it's good 1 year, it may not be good the next year, but if we have a solid leasing program that is supplemented by partially owned and fleet vehicles that are leased, we can definitely put a program together. We're really kind of looking for guidance as to what you may be looking for. And the research that we've presented really is Hannah's team has looked at. We've looked at other options. We opened that up to other vendors as well. And the enterprise one seems to be the one that could fit our model the best. But again, it's really what's the overall vision that we're seeking.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yes,
If I
sir.
may. Further to Bill's thoughts, I wrote some questions down myself. I just came on board, but Hannah and I have had some conversations about this, and I have to be honest with you. After having been responsible for fleets numbering over 6,500 with about a $200 million actual price tag on those units, we've done quite a bit of studying on this, and I'll be honest with you, it scares the Jesus out of me to hear that one organization has provided us with an analysis. I guess my question to Hannah or to Jessica would be, are these recommendations coming from the vendor, coming from Enterprise, or did we have an independent contractor come in and do an actual analysis on our fleet, and based on that tell us what was the average utilization of our fleet, what was the number of units that have actually exceeded their recommended life service, and what was the underutilization of our fleet, and based on that, what would they recommend to us?
So I can definitely answer that one. So we have done the Mercury study, which is we referenced in earlier public work infrastructure meetings, that did come in and analyze our fleet in terms of the age, the condition, what it would take to make a sustainable model. Yes, sir.
Just define the Mercury study. Who's Mercury?
Sorry. Mercury is a fleet specialty consulting group, essentially. And when they came in, they did evaluate based on utilization, as well as industry standards in terms of our replacement cycles, and provided their recommendations based on a best practice of a sinking fund. So we have taken that into consideration. In terms of a traditional lease program, we did not see that as a viable option. As Bill had stated, we did look at a few other lease options in this process to understand, is Enterprise the right model for us, or are there other things that would be a better fit? And the standard model is not advantageous. That's one that we most typically think about from a personal vehicle side. And the biggest difference between their models and what Enterprise has presented us is essentially you have a trade-in value versus a resale value. That's the largest market gain that Enterprise is able to bring to the table, is that instead of offering us a trade-in value upon completion of the lease terms, they actually offer a resale value and give us the equity back. So the viability of this program is based around that premise, that it's not a traditional lease program for these smaller vehicles. It is an anomaly that we weren't able to find anyone else that quite honestly met that same model to meet the expectations of the city. We have, explored other options in terms of presenting what it would take to self-fund this sort of program, but given the limitations that we have with operating budgets and the cash available, that wasn't something that at this time we were able to self-solve. What we currently are doing today, as we've kind of reiterated, our fleet's aging. It's well past its useful life. We do have vehicles that are underutilized because they are backups, because our downtimes are so frequent in currents that our teams, to sustain the service that they have, in some instances have kept old vehicles that are costing us more money in case their newer one breaks down. So there's definitely an opportunity to reduce the overall size of the fleet if we were to get it to an acceptable age where we could increase our uptime and our reliability. But I know that none of our teams, in particular within the public works and utilities that are a vast majority of the customers that we work on, want any of their service to be depreciated because we don't have a vehicle to service the needs. So we do have some duplicative ones just based off of that. If we're able to get to a point of replacement cycle on a healthy balance, I do feel that we could reduce because of the underutilization that we do have in place today. But the studies we have the best practices. It's a matter of, like Jessica said, which policy do we want to go with? Is it to help solve the immediate need with less of a capital infusion now, and accept that we may need that later to unwind the program? Or do we infuse the fleet replacement program up front so that we can create this self-sustaining model long-term? Or I guess there is the third option of maintain as we are today, which just increases the age of our fleet. And since the 2015 study, the age of a fleet has increased, I believe, by 2 to 3 years, if I remember correctly, from the time when they said we were already past due. So we're moving in the wrong direction. So we need to do something to course correct.
Thank you. If I could go back to Mr. Jackson, is your concern that this is a sole source that we're looking at, or is there more to it?
No, sir, Mr. Chair. It's as much that's part of it, that it's a sole source. But the other part is, and I don't know this, we have not had this conversation, I don't know what our actual internal capability is as far as maintaining our fleets. I don't know what our KPIs are in terms of the turnaround time for vehicles going into the shop and coming out, and how that's actually impacting our ability to sustain operations by keeping the equipment that we have on the road actually on the road. But that is not as much my concern as is the cost or the ability to defray costs by utilizing certain acquisition methodologies. And I'm hearing the leasing being a viable option, but I'm hearing it from the standpoint of going through a sole source as opposed to actually coming through the city. And I think that there are other options available to us that I would like to definitely get into with Hannah and with the city manager and bring something back to you that's, I believe, will be much more attractive.
Just in terms, sorry, Chair, this is Jessica.
Yeah, go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you. In terms of the feedback on the sole source, while I completely understand the want to receive additional information, it is my understanding that procurement and Hannah, along with legal, I believe at times, did reach out to some local vendors on their ability to provide a leased vehicle program as the one we're looking into. And then also the enterprise program is off of a state contract, so that it has gone through a full procurement process. That doesn't mean we can't do obviously more work if that's the want of this body in terms of seeking out additional feedback. But this would not be a sole source. It is under the state's procurement process.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to first ask Councilman Lesser if he has any comments.
Couple questions. I think one was answered. I think I know the answer to, but was Faust Fleet Leasing, were they contacted to ask if they wanted to entertain a proposal on this?
Faust.
I do not believe Faust was on the list, but I can double check the list of vendors that we called to discuss their options.
Where'd that list come from?
Worked with procurement to create a list of randomly selected local and national firms. It truly was some pseudo-random, not wanting to target anything specific, but wanting to make sure that we had a balance between local and national.
Okay. Well, that surprised me. There would be the main person locally, I would think, that would do that. The majority of the contractors that in my business that I work with do their fleets through Faust. I can't remember if they're open or closed in leases. It's a little bit of a different, but I know Councilman Emerson would be familiar with them as well from some of the clients that he has. So that would be my first question. And then I think you did answer this. Did we go directly to where there wouldn't be a middleman in regards to directly to Ford, Chevy to see if those are options? I think you did say you checked that and that was not a viable option.
Correct. We did look into that, and the biggest difference with the direct is that when you at the end of term, they provide essentially trade-in value, which any of us that have traded in a vehicle know that's substantially lower than what you get at resale, which made the programs not as advantageous for the city.
That's all I had. I would highly recommend, I know, there again, I won't speak for Tony, but I do know, and maybe even Neil as well. I shouldn't rule him out, but I do know Faust does significant amount of local and regional contractors as far as their fleet. So I would highly recommend if they were contacted that we reach out to them. That's all I got.
Thank you, Councilman. I guess I'd open it up to Councilman Duncan or Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala. Any questions? Councilwoman?
Okay, got the mute unmuted. Okay, Chair, thank you. I would just say that, would definitely be interested to see what James could bring to the table as well, especially with working with much higher budgets and do more work, if that's what, the committee's desire is. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Duncan?
You're on mute.
There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
My computer decided to run some background update all of a sudden. I don't know what that was.
Sure it did. Sure it did.
So I just have a question. How far back, okay, when we talk about the costs versus savings, short-term, long-term, how far back did we go to look at our costs and maintenance and all those other sorted to see what possible savings could be long-term with leasing? I guess that'd be and take away, I'll talk about these in a minute, take away the upfront and the backdoor costs for a minute. And I'm not discounting those, but in terms of the overall length of a program, how far back did we go to kind of contrast those costs?
On the initial Mercury report, when it was conducted, I believe it went back to look at our current fleet 5 or 10 years in terms of our practices. It did not have an annual estimated savings based on upgrading our fleet or updating our fleet to the newest recommended cycles. And in our analysis, when we were looking at the cost, to be quite honest with you, the city of Topeka hasn't had a sustainable model for us to really be able to baseline our specific savings. So in looking at the operational impacts, the fuel economy was industry standard essentially with a savings of about 20%, looking from our 10-plus-year-old vehicles up to a new one, just based on the technology improvements that have been made over the last 10 years. And going forward on the operational piece, we're a little unique in a lot of senses since we have our own in-house fleet department. So while our light-duty vehicles are a large percentage of our fleet, they are not the majority of our fleet. They make up less than half of all the equipment that our fleet department works on. And our overhead, with man hours being one of them, is a large piece of it. So we haven't been able to use our numbers to try to estimate actual operational savings. However, with starting to migrate and trying this as more or less a pilot program, which the recommendation was initially 100 vehicles, it gives us that opportunity to see what the impacts are on our fleet and start to aggregate that up and blow it out to essentially make assumptions, if you will, as to what the long-term impact would be if we went with this model. A lot of our heavy-duty vehicles, which is something that we are going to be looking at next, are a large issue when it comes to our operational efficiencies as well. We have an entire shop that's predominantly our heavy equipment, and it's one that is constantly backed up because we know we have stuff down. So long story short, it's hard for us to make that full estimate. I could have used Enterprise's assumptions, which had some very positive savings in terms of our operational costs. However, I feel that might be slightly optimistic given headcount is our largest overhead in fleet. And at this point, with light duty only, we wouldn't likely be able to materially reduce our staff and our headcount. Over the course of a 5-year period, I'd like to see that decrease because our workload would decrease accordingly. But I don't have numbers that I feel confident to put on paper and say that this is the savings. So right now, with the enterprise model that we've shown, the saving is predominantly through resale, with some fuel economy coming into play.
That's helpful. And just 2 more points or questions, I guess. The first is, I guess, back to Councilmember Emerson's point is, I mean, while I understand that if we stop with this program, there's a cost, I mean, we're going to have to start replacing some of these anyway. So, I mean, if we can start, as you said, sort of a pilot program now to see how it works with an understanding. Best case, we just keep renewing it every year, and we're able to do this for many years. I think simultaneously, we keep sort of budgeting what the end may be as we pass with each year and be prepared for that cost if that's where we go. But I think we're at a point where we've waited so long for not anyone's fault, but we've just got to start making some of these decisions and replacing some of these vehicles regardless. So there's that cost. And then to your other point, it is similar to what Chief of Staff mentioned, was some direction on which vehicles. I guess my response to that is the ones you identify have needs now and that fit best into this program. Because I think to Hannah's point, since we haven't had sort of a uniform program across the board for a decade or more, it's really hard to sit here and identify, well, this vehicle now, because we already have something in place that tells us we need to do this now, or it's time to move this out of the rotation. And so I think some of that answer to that question goes back to relying on staff to identify where the biggest area of immediate need is, and B, which vehicles fit into this program versus vehicles that maybe won't fit into this type of program. So thank you.
And Mr. Chair, if I may.
Thank you, Councilman. Yes, sir.
See, that's part of my concern at this point. And in all fairness to Hannah and the team, I believe that they have conducted as an exhaustive review of the situation as they possibly could. However, when you ask the question, how much do we think that we can save by replacing these vehicles, if we can't go back into our maintenance records, say 5, 6, 7 years, and look at what it actually cost us to maintain these units that we're replacing, and based on that, give a reasonable, say a 90% confidence on what our likely savings are going to be going forward as we replace these units, then we do have a major problem. But further to that, I'll give you another example. In one municipality for which I was responsible, we replaced 25 units. Replacing those 25 units helped us to save over $600,000 the following year just in maintenance costs alone. And that was a recurring savings based on those units having been taken out of the fleet. So every time we began to bite into that aged fleet, and that fleet constituted about 22, I think it was 2,500 units, of which 1,052 were actually had exceeded their recommended service life. So as we began eating into that, we're talking about over $500,000 in maintenance costs that we were able to save. And because of the model that we utilized to actually replace those units, which was a leasing model, we were spending no more than $300,000 to $400,000 a year for those new units on a 7-year lease program, which netted a $200,000 savings, with which we used those funds to buy the light duty equipment that cost under $75,000. We had a cap. Anything over $75,000, we would actually finance. Anything under $75,000, we would actually utilize the money from savings to buy it outright. And by buying in limited numbers those units as part of the replacement program itself, we were able to replace those units immediately, pay for them, move them out of the way, and continue on with replacing the heavy equipment units that needed to be replaced as part of that program.
So the units you replaced, the 25 units, were heavy equipment?
They were heavy equipment.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
With major maintenance costs?
Major maintenance costs.
Okay.
Over $600,000 in 1 year.
Okay. Great information. I think, was Mary Feeney going to discuss anything?
I apologize, Chair. If I could just respond 1 minute, if that's all right to that.
Go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you. So, James, thank you so much for your feedback. I do want to just clarify that the team did go back and look at those maintenance records over that time period that you mentioned. So we do have that data, and that'll be a great resource for you. And then secondly, just looking at the lease program, and Mr. Jackson, I'm not sure if you were aware, but the leasing discussion was requested by council for us to look into as a potential option. So I think one of the things you identified is that the leasing option is unlikely to be the most economically efficient approach, but it's whether we're able to put aside operating funds to address the near-term need of the fleet department. And then what we're talking about in terms of what we've included, I guess, in the leasing model, Hannah, correct me if I'm wrong, but it would be vehicles underneath that $75,000 threshold. We're not looking at this point in this analysis the heavy duty vehicles. But I just wanted to, point that out. We're giving feedback on what we think could be an option based on whatever the governing body, this committee, believes is our priority policy issues that we need to address.
Gotcha.
If the committee would like to move forward, we can open it up again and get additional feedback from other vendors. But that it would be helpful to understand whether this is an option that we want to continue to explore.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. By the way, what does economically efficient mean?
It means that it's probably not the cheapest option.
Okay. That's a great term. I'm going to have to remember that one.
Mr. Chair, further.
In the near term, it might be advantageous, right? And so we're looking out over a longer period of time, which is why I was using that phrasing. But in the long term, it's probably not the most cheap.
I got it. If you would, let's let Mary Feeney weigh in, and then I'll
Yes,
come back to you, sir. Mary?
Yes, thank you, council members. The master equity lease is pretty much a boilerplate standard agreement that Enterprise uses for all cities. My goal was to make sure that it was consistent with Kansas law. And towards that end, I worked with the city of Lenexa, who entered into an agreement with Enterprise, and they had certain amendments that they were successful in obtaining. And I used those same amendments. Specifically, I wanted to beef up the non-appropriation clause, which makes it very clear that if the governing body does not appropriate funds, we can terminate our agreement with Enterprise. And I was successful in getting those amendments. So we have an agreement with Enterprise. Nothing's been signed yet, of course, waiting, pending on your decision. But I'm satisfied that we do have an agreement with Enterprise with certain amendments that are consistent with Kansas law. And so I'm ready to move forward if you all are.
Very good. Thank you, Mary. Mr. Jackson, back to you.
Yes, sir. I'll defer my comments until after I've had an opportunity to speak with Bill and the city manager.
Councilman
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I guess, you know, again, I thought about 3 meetings ago, this is the direction we're going to head. And it seemed to me like and I totally understand this is a special circumstance right now because of the resale market and interest rates. But to me, it's like if you come to me and say, hey, for the next 12 months, I'll give you, 20% return on your money in the bank, who would say, no, I'm not going to do that, so I can study other options and stuff. If we have an option right now to do something that at best it actually makes money, and at worst it might break even, we get to use these trucks for a year for free. So to me, I guess I totally understand Mr. Jackson wanting to, do a more holistic overview of everything, and I love that. I love hearing that. And Councilwoman Hiller, I think she probably paid you to say pay cash for bring that up for anything below $75,000. But my only thing is, the longer we wait, this thing goes away eventually. So if it's anywhere near what Hannah presented a couple months ago now, I'm all for doing it on a limited basis for the vehicles that it makes financial sense to do so. And I think it was just the light trucks were the ones that had the highest resale and the best return right now. So that's my only thing. I think sometimes as a city, if we get too bureaucratic, we don't take advantage of, things like a business would. A business would say, man, you mean we can get this vehicle and have it for a year and actually turn it back in after driving, 40,000 miles and get $1,400 in addition to what we paid for it? I mean, everyone would do that. So that's my only thing, I guess. So.
Yeah, I guess the concern I see is if we get, what was the pilot size again? Was it 100 vehicles?
Yes,
we
sir.
were looking at? So what's the cost of 100 new vehicles?
Based on the ones that we're looking at, it's roughly $2.5 million, give or take, which is why that outside of that 1-year program, we're looking at about a $2 million obligation to repurchase them, because we're assuming out of those 100 vehicles that we're getting some money back. I'd have to look at the specific numbers, but slightly over $2 million.
So we would have to set aside $2 million in our budget for the chance that we would not continue the leasing program and have to buy those vehicles.
Yes.
But either way, we'd end up with new vehicles.
Yes, sir. And looking forward, based on the cash-based sinking program, if that is the direction we wanted to go, we were looking at needing an infusion of about $4.5 million up front for a citywide fleet program, as well as an ongoing operating budget. I believe it was about $2 or $2.5 million annually committed to a sinking fund to be able to replace all the vehicles on a cycle. And it would still take a little bit of time to get that up. But absolutely looking at, from this perspective, based on the climate that we're in, it's SUVs as well as light duty trucks that would be inclusive in it. And it would give us the opportunity of leveraging the data that we have from an operational perspective, because we do have data going back to 2010, and be able to compare it with the new vehicles that we have right now. Because of our limited updated fleet, the sample size that we have to pull from for like vehicles of like use, where they were 10 years ago to where they would cost us now, is very limited. So there's a lot of assumptions built in, and this gives us a chance to pilot some of those assumptions and really use our data to blow out what the impacts could be long term.
So let me put forth a suggestion here. I think, have you had a chance, Mr. Jackson, to review all of the data
No,
that
sir.
Hannah's presented to the committee over the last, couple of months, starting with the
Hannah and I
Mercury
have
study?
talked about it, and I guess you shared it with me when we had our discussion.
Mm-hmm.
She did share it with me. The specifics of the agreement, I don't have, but she did very clearly spell out what the expectations were.
Okay. I think it might be good to give you time to look through the study, ask questions, get with the chief of staff and city manager. But I also heard Councilman Emerson's desire to move this forward quickly. So I'm wondering if we could, we've got the CIP on the docket. I think the first meeting in June 1st perhaps. we need to get past that, I think, before we tackle this one. But certainly at the meeting following, we could, and I guess what I would like to see is a recommendation, a unified recommendation from the administration for what you propose moving forward, what makes the most sense. So that means everybody that's discussed it here getting together, and we kind of know what the options are, and certainly need to discuss the options, but I would like to see what you recommend as a group. Chief of Staff, I assume that's something you'll take on for us. Great. I think given that, I would propose. Councilman Lasser? Oh.
Yeah, there again, the only thing that while we were doing this, I just sent a text out, and because I thought I was remembering correctly from previous conversations, but for instance, Bettis Asphalt uses Faust Leasing here in town to do all their vehicles and their entire fleet, and so there again, I'm bothered that they weren't contacted to provide a proposal or at least consulted in this process. That I don't know how we would have missed that.
Can we make that happen in the next 3 weeks?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Let's make sure we've exhausted all local resources. I understand Enterprise is huge, and they have a huge ability to buy vehicles, state contract, all those things. But worst case would be particularly a local vendor coming back and saying we could have done the same thing or we could have done it cheaper. So let's make sure we do that. I would propose, I guess, that we give authority to move ahead and bring this in front of the council. So we're not going to recommend a specific thing right now. Just give you the opportunity to bring this in front of the council on the 8th, 7th or 8th, whenever that meeting is, and start the discussion there, because this does need to be a council-wide approval, I believe.
Sir, do we have an infrastructure committee meeting next week or next month?
We have not yet set the date for that. We could set it early and meet here.
That would be my question or recommendation. If Hannah, how long do you think we need to pull this together?
I could reach out and do the analysis on the local, reach out this week, and then if we had next week to start to consolidate, I feel that we could probably pull something together in a few weeks. If we want to target the 15th for a full council discussion, it might be a little tight, but if we targeted the 20, well, I guess we could probably pull off the 15th, looking at the calendar.
Mr. Jackson, does that give us time to talk? And
Yes, sir, sure does.
that'd be my recommendation, sir, if we come to the committee and then present you what we really have and then move to the full body.
All right, we will try to set a committee meeting for the end of the week of the 7th, and that would get us
about 3 weeks.
About 3 weeks. Which means we'd have to revise our third Monday meeting for next month, so see if we can find, and if it ends up just being a special meeting to discuss this one topic, that'll be fine. That may be what we do, so. All right. I think Liz will probably have to find an available room, and so we'd be looking at, maybe the 10th or 11th.
The 11th, that's Sunday, the surgery that day on the 11th, so I'll be out all day.
Okay, so 9th, 10th.
9th would be best, yeah, the 9th would be best for me.
Let's target the 9th if we could. And again, I'm going to suggest we just make it a special meeting to discuss this one issue. That way staff doesn't have to prepare for other things, and then we'll continue, if necessary, with the meeting later that month. That sound okay, Councilman? Councilman Lesser, you good with that?
June 9th.
Yep.
Okay, great.
June 9th, you said, is the meeting day?
We'll look at that. Yeah, we'll try to get a meeting sometime that day. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay, thanks for the update. Thanks for the discussion. Important topic, and I think this kind of sets a direction for the city for a few years, so we'll see where it goes. Number 5, items from staff. Is there anything, Mr. Jackson or Chief of Staff?
The only thing I am glad to report, and it'll be in a report that'll be coming out later this afternoon or first thing in the morning, but the open projects that were presented in the fourth quarter financials, the utilities has closed 78 of those projects. Public Works has closed 39 of those projects, with almost 100 more that'll be closed by the end of the month between the two of them. So there were a lot of projects that were just hanging out there open for whatever reason. But the staff has been tasked diligently to get those corrected. And so you have a much better report coming this evening or first thing in the morning. So we'll have it for council tomorrow. And then our hopes are July that we'll have it completely outlined to where we go forward every quarter from there. It'll be up to date completely.
Very good. All right, anything else from the staff? Braxton? Absolutely.
Just wanted to give you guys a real-time update of what's going on with the Kansas River. Over the last 24 hours at the Topeka Water Plant at the USGS gauge, we've gone from 5,000 CFS to 40,000 CFS. We've seen the turbidity go from 200 to 2,400. With that, there's a lot of organics in the water, which is causing some taste and odor issues. It's basically MIB and geosmin, which is basically, it's a taste and odor. It's a nuisance, but our water still maintains complete regulatory compliance with all EPA and KDHE parameters. So water is safe. Unfortunately, we don't currently have the ability to treat for taste and odor. And that's what we're seeing, which is secondary taste and odor issue in the river. It's noted by a sort of musty smell and flavor.
Thank you. Any flooding concerns at this point, or too early to tell?
Not at this point.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Braxton.
Chair,
I did have something for Braxton real quick.
I have a question too, Chair.
Okay, let's go with Councilman Lesser first, and then Councilwoman Valdivia-Alcala. Councilman Lesser.
Yeah, hey, Braxton. I just wanted to say that I had a conversation right before I got on this call with the fairly new gentleman at Kansas Gas, Mr. Semino. And I just wanted to sing your praises of how positive he was and said in working with you, and how optimistic he is of our reusable energy project that you're working on. So I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you, Council Member. Troy's a great guy to work with.
Great. Thanks, Councilman. Councilwoman?
Thanks, Chair. Braxton, how are we getting that information out to the community about the possible taste issue, but the water still being safe?
I plan to get with Molly this afternoon to get a press release out. I have personally responded to a number of emails from concerned constituents this morning, but yeah, that's my next plan. I wanted to use this opportunity to get the message out, to reassure you that the water is safe to drink. It's unfortunate that we have to pull out of the Kansas River, and at times we have taste and odor issues, but I will be working with Molly this afternoon.
So I appreciate that, and that you gave the notice right now, because I do have an Oakland NIA meeting, but anything to help move the message forward is always appreciated for that transparency. Thank you, Braxton.
Thanks, Council Member.
Thanks, Braxton. All right. Anything else from staff? All right. Items from the committee. I've got one. We did plan at some point on continuing the discussion of traffic issues. Unfortunately, the traffic engineer was not able to be here for this meeting, but thought it might be a good time just to have some discussion. I know Councilwoman Valdivia-Alcala has some issues to discuss, and I think the goal here is to maybe give you a list of things to consider for a future presentation. So I think the gamut is speeding, signals, stop signs primarily, uncontrolled intersections, and I would like to add to that traffic signals. So I guess I'll ask the standing committee first. Councilman Emerson, any issues traffic-wise?
Thank you, Chair. In my district, I often get calls of people, saying, I have cars speeding down the road and stuff. And oftentimes, I guess the answer I get, there's not the warrants for it, or for various reasons. So I'm all ears if there are other things we can do.
Great. Councilman Lesser?
No, sir.
Thank you. All right. Councilwoman Valdivia-Alcala?
Thanks, Chair. I think that we've gotten to the point here in Oakland, and my next neighborhood meeting in North Topeka, I'm going to see what comparable information that I can bring forward of a really untenable situation. And so all of those things that you mentioned, Neil, are things that I really hope that we can find and bring forth presentations on. I would add to that, possible speed bumps. I would also add to that with the signage, speed limit signs, because Oakland is an area of 5,000 to 6,000 residents. And so it really is its own very large enclave. And then again, as stated in the last two meetings ago, the number of uncontrolled intersections and the speeding, because there's no speed limit signs, et cetera, I'm willing to just, do whatever I need to do to help assist in that manner, because we have to do something. And I will let you know, I have been in contact with Kevin Cook, because he's, the county rep in this area, been in contact with the chief, and, we're looking at a plan, along with the sheriff's department that way for some, speed, checking and all of that stuff, which I think that there needs to be more of as well. But I was also told maybe about 15 years or so ago, when Button was still mayor, that there were a number of signs were taken out across the city. And I can just tell you from what I've seen, this is definitely impacting the safety of our community. So I thought that Christy Erickson's presentation 2 meetings ago was quite interesting. And so I am just saying, please, let's move forward in whatever way that we have to take a serious look at this. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chief of Staff, in your previous job, I think we had communication from Chief Wheelis that more tickets have been written in the last few months than in previous years. Could you speak just a little bit about where you see speeding issues? I've heard those complaints, and frankly, I've seen some demonstrations of that, not by me, but by other people. So just a little bit of background there, if you could.
I think the Councilwoman hits on several points that are concerns to several areas of our Topeka community. Speeding, traffic control devices, not obeying them, and just overall driving habits. I think one of the things that I'd like to see us do is also maybe look at the education piece, and maybe we can have Channel 4 and Molly create some stuff along with the PIO for the police department But we really need to, I think, get aggressive in putting the information out there, reminders of people and stuff like that. You know, when we talk about uncontrolled intersections, there's rules of the law for the road that govern that. When there's not speed limit signs posted, there's rules that govern that as well. But with that being said, I think we need to remind people, educate people, and we could probably come up with a pretty comprehensive program. It sounds like Councilwoman Valdivia-Acla has already got a good start on that. So I just think we need to come together as a team and address some of those things. As we know, one of the things is when we talk about traffic enforcement, it's to gain compliance is what we want. So voluntary compliance is what we'd like to see. And sometimes to gain voluntary compliance, you have to take enforcement action for that to happen. And so I think there's a lot of programs out there, Click It or Ticket, those are programs that are, sponsored by the state for NHTSA and Traffic Highway Safety Administration, as well as speed enforcement and school zone enforcement. So there are a lot of options out there that we can look at to help kind of financially supplement some enforcement programs that are out there.
Thank you. I think the thing I've noticed recently, maybe in this last year, that, people speed, there's no question about it. People don't really drive the speed limit, but they get a little bit over it and it's okay. But when you hit a school zone, everybody slows down to 20 miles an hour. And what I've seen recently is people starting to edge that up, just in some cases, just ignoring the school zones. And I don't know that I've seen officers enforcing in the school zones as much. It doesn't seem like there's quite as much as in the past. So maybe something to look at.
Primary speed enforcement's done really primarily by the motor unit.
Right.
And so the motor unit, I'm not sure what their staffing level is at this point, but those are things that we can look at, have conversation with the chief on what manpower disbursement is.
Great.
You have a question?
I do.
Yes, Councilwoman?
Bill, I'm always like a big cheerleader for the Channel 4 thing, right? And I think that would be wonderful to have an education component on there. I also think it would be good, to have something as the NIA meetings start up again. However, let me just tell you that a certain component that I have seen traffic just race up and down Sardu, Lake, Seward, going over the Branner Bridge, either way, it is mostly younger people. And I don't mean people in their 50s and 60s and 70s. Come on. I don't know. Somebody told me that Lesser has a really bad lead foot, but I don't know about that. But this is what I'm saying. My belief is that these folks that are doing this incredible, disrespect with the living in this environment together, is that they're not going to be the ones watching Channel 4. They're definitely not the ones that are at the NIA meetings. So that education component is important. I believe that it's going to take, dare I say, an aggressive messaging and maybe, more ticketing, because I would be interested to know how many traffic tickets were given in Oakland. But again, not to belabor the point, but as an example, we have an ATV park here in Oakland. And so folks for years have brought their ATVs out here on their trailers, et cetera. But it is getting so blatant, and there's no license plates on these ATVs. They are running up and down the streets. I think I said this the last time, 4 or 5 ATVs came to withdraw money out of the Invista Credit Union, and they were just riding like they had all the rights of any licensed vehicle. That type of deliberateness is not going to be something that they're going to learn from an education piece. I think it's going to take a little bit more stringent action, but we can discuss that more as we move along. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. All right. I would like to see some discussion, and this can be down the road, doesn't need to be immediate. I think these are probably more immediate issues, just kind of the state of our signals in town. I think we've had a program over the years to try to eliminate traffic signals wherever possible, which I think is great. And we've done so. I'd like to have some discussion on what that program looks like. I said at some signals, particularly downtown, that just really don't make a lot of sense anymore. And I'm sure traffic engineering's looking into those and probably has an answer. So again, I don't think we need to do that next month. Maybe it's a couple months down the road when we run out of other things to talk about.
Sir.
So, yes, sir.
And Mr. Jackson, I have been working with Christy Erickson on that.
Okay.
And also the replacement program that we have going for the traffic signals. But if you give us 2 months, we can probably get something put together. Because one of the things I wanted to see is where we're at on the replacement cycle.
Right.
Because we schedule that every year in the CIP and we spend X number of dollars on that. And so that was something I was curious when I started looking at the projects. So if you give us a couple of months, we'll get you something on that.
Okay. And I think there was additional funding out of the surplus. Great. Yeah, a couple months down the road will be a good topic. Okay. Anything else from the committee? Councilman?
I just had one thing, and sorry, this actually goes back to the leasing, but Hannah, I didn't know. I had a question actually. Somebody was watching texted me, and they said, "Did we check with Laird Noller, or maybe it's easier? Can you just tell me who you did check with here locally?"
We did check with Laird Noller. I'll have to pull and see who the other, I believe there's 1 or 2 other local. We just picked, I think it was 5 or 6. It's been since right after our last meeting, just to make sure that we've looked at all the options. And I can definitely provide a lot of those questions. The piece that it came down to, quite honestly, was that these places offer a traditional lease program, which is not advantageous to the city given our buying power and our borrowing rates. So they didn't offer any of the equity in the resale pieces, but we did contact and have the conversation with Laird Noller and a few others.
Okay, great. Yeah, if you could send that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Councilman Lesser, anything else this afternoon? Nope. All right.
I'm good.
Thank you. All right, so we have a meeting set for June 9th, and we have a regularly scheduled meeting set for the third Monday. We can make a determination, I think, of whether we want to continue with that at the June 9th meeting. And I believe that's it. Anything else? Mr. Jackson, anything else?
No, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.